morning. See if this works. Okay. I want you to complete this sentence. In 10 years, I hope to use my gifts to serve the church by doing what? So take a minute, fill in the blank, write it down. What would you say? You're here because God is calling you to do something great, but the world and the enemy doesn't want it to happen. And you're going to be bombarded as you embark on this journey and this mission with lots of different tasks, people pulling you in different directions, wanting your time. You will face difficult situations, conversations, decisions. People want more and more of you. They may even disagree with you, intimidate you, and this is where I want to help. After today, you're going to know how to assert yourself. You're going to know how to say no, and how to set boundaries that correspond with God's plan for your life. Let's begin. It sounds pretty good, right? Because this is going to make you happier. Let's see. Because you know that you're rooted in God's will. When we talk about communication, there's lots of ways to talk about it. We can talk about communication for friendship, for romance, for intimacy, for anger, frustration, even listening skills. We're not talking about any of that today. Now, what we will discuss is going to help in all of those categories, but it's really what I want to do is give you tools to thrive. I hope that as you wrote down your answer, I hope that it sounded something along these lines when you filled in that blank. We know what we're called to do, what we're called to be. We have a very lofty calling, and we want this to be the foundation of our mission at all times. We know this, right? This is a framework, a guidepost for how we know that we're on the right track. Are we being more like Christ? And are we on that path to sainthood? Okay, I'm not pointing in the right direction. We'll see. So there was a young woman I worked with once. Her name, we'll call her Alice for the sake of protecting her privacy. She was this high-achieving young woman, went to a very competitive college. Right out of college, she got this kind of job that a lot of people in the world are very impressed when they hear, wow, oh, she's doing this. And she excelled at this work. She was really great at it. She was learning, absorbing everything, just couldn't get enough. People noticed her ability to take on tasks and excel at them, do very well. But what ended up happening was there were some issues at work, and people started emailing her after hours, and she slowly became somebody who was checking her emails after work, working on projects on the weekends. She was also newly married and was finding less time to be at home with her husband. And this is something that we want to pay attention to, right? Because she was starting to say yes to things that weren't in line with who she was called to be. She was involved in ministry with her parish. She was being taken away from that because these emails started to creep in. And so I want you to reflect on some of these questions. We're going to build out this fill-in-the-blank sentence that you just wrote, and I want to reflect on this to help you as you do that, to think about what are your gifts? What are your charisms, your apostolate? To what will you be sent? What do you have to offer that the world needs? What gives you joy? What are you good at? Who does the world need you to be? So I want you to think about those questions as you build out this statement. Because when you know what your identity is, when your mission is rooted in who, and you know and are confident in who God is calling you to be, then it's an easy framework to work from. We're going to talk about ways to say no. And what helps you say no is when you realize and think through what those choices mean. You have to act out of that true identity. We know that being takes priority over doing. At the end of our lives, we'll simply be in the presence of God. And that's what we want to practice here, even in our mission. So when you understand who you are in God's eyes, you will find that doing part a whole lot easier. So when you play that out, like Alice did, she started to say yes to these emails and becoming someone who she wasn't. Thinking about that a week from now, a month from now, months, years from now, what type of person would she become if she kept saying yes to after-hours emails? That's what we want to be thinking about for you and your mission as well. So let's go back to this statement. You're going to get about 5 minutes. And I want you to think of this as a conversation with God. You're having a conversation with God about who you think he's asking you to be. You want to build this out. Go back to that idea. Call to mind anything you can identify, your unique gifts, your charisms, your attractions, your callings. What does the world need? So I want you to spend some time. And this is a tough one. I don't want you to put a lot of pressure on yourself. Some people might think, oh my goodness, I haven't received this big message from the sky. I don't know what my mission and calling is. I have to put it down on this paper in 5 minutes. Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. This is also not an opportunity to invent yourself, to kind of be navel-gazing and thinking, creating your own image. But we want to spend some time really thinking about this again because we want our missions to make sure they're rooted in their proper place. And you want to be confident in that moving forward. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes now. Write out, build out this mission statement, have a conversation with God about what he's calling you to do. Go for it. On this journey, and we know there's potential for failure out there. There's obstacles, there's pitfalls. And when you know and cleave to this mission statement, when you kind of know what you're called to do in the macro, it makes it much easier to be motivated in those moments. Because there's going to be times when you make people unhappy. When you communicate truly and clearly, charitably, strong enough so you can overcome any aversion to that unsettledness, that discomfort with making someone unhappy. And so your motivation, this mission has to be strong enough that you're willing to do that you're willing to make a person unhappy by telling them no so that you can stay close to what God is asking you to do. I knew somebody who worked for the church, and she had a higher-up, a boss who would make a lot of off-color sexual jokes. He would make a lot of sexist remarks. He was not a priest. But it made her uncomfortable, but she would laugh. She would laugh to get along as she was in his presence, right? She was his junior, and that was sort of the culture and the environment that was created. But as she matured and continued to grow into who God wanted her to be, she decided she was no longer going to laugh at these jokes when they came up, when she found herself in these work settings. And so that fear of not being and living out that calling was enough to motivate her to stop her from laughing at the jokes. And initially when she stopped, she paid for it. She fell out of favor with this individual. She wasn't getting invited to outings. She wasn't getting the gossipy texts anymore. But with this gave her great freedom because she knew what she was called to do. So I want you to think about your own difficult situation that you encounter at work. A time when you feel pressure to say yes, when you know you really want to say no. Maybe it's a pastor who wants you to work late 6 out of 7 nights a week. Lots of projects, lots of cool ideas, things coming up. Think about that situation, write it down, and then I want you to answer these questions. Does saying yes in those situations go against who you want to be? How will saying no make it easier? And then when you're done, share it with your neighbor. So I'll give you 5-ish minutes to do that. And if we're not paying attention to it, it leads us to burnout. And that's what happens when we don't manage that stress well, especially our workplace stress. You're trying to bring people to Jesus. You have this mission, you have this goal, and it's really hard to do that when you're burnt out. Alice, we were talking about Alice earlier, and she got to this point where she wasn't able to focus anymore. She had cloudy, foggy memory. She wasn't remembering her to-dos. She was getting overwhelmed at the thought of going to work, becoming more worried. Even at home, her and her husband had planned a camping trip, and they had all these plans in place. Something happened at the last minute where they realized they didn't have a certain item, so they had to stop on the way somewhere to pick something up, and that little shift in plan was enough to make her break down and cry. She was getting so overwhelmed that she started having panic attacks in the mornings before work. So much so to the point that she wasn't able to do her job. She took a leave of absence from work. Dishes were piling up, laundry wasn't done. It was getting to a really bad place. And when you're burnt out, you can't do the work that you're called to do. Not only that, you aren't a good witness when you're burnt out. You're a better witness to Christ when you're fully present, full of positivity, full of energy, and when you know your mission. You're fully invested in that mission, in that calling. So this is huge. These are 4 ways that I like to think about burnout, is putting it in these categories. Physical energy, right? So if you're physically full of energy, you're feeling great, you're strong, you can do anything, you're not tired. But on the other hand, low physical energy means you're feeling tired. It's hard to get out of bed. This is what was happening for Alice day to day. Positive or negative emotions. Are you feeling great about the day? Do you see things as glass half full? Or is it half empty and I'm feeling irritable, I'm resentful, I'm not really up for this? Alice was super resentful about those after-work emails and projects and deadlines. Mentally, are you focused? Do you feel like I'm sharp, I can think clearly, come to conclusions, make decisions, or is it a little foggy? Do I have trouble remembering things? Alice had a lot of problems remembering things at this point in her life. And then even spiritually, do we feel connected with that main mission? Or is there a detachment or apathy for our spiritual life? And so sometimes it's nice to look at it in this way because we can feel physically fine, but we might be emotionally drained. Or the opposite could be true. We could be emotionally doing really well, but physically tired. And so sometimes it's nice to break it down into these categories to think about, oh, these are signs that I might be burnt out. How am I doing physically? How am I doing mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? Young adults. So we're going to take a little quiz. We're going to find out how burned out you really are. So this is how it works, okay? So I'll just use question number 1 as an example. So I feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy. So if you say, no, not at all, I don't feel run down or drained of physical energy, I'm going to put a 1, right? But if you say, I very often feel run down and drained of physical energy, you're going to put a 5. Okay, and so I want you to keep a tally. So if you don't have a paper, you can use your phone and just add the score, but write down the numbers to each of these questions. Whatever it is for you. There's no right or wrong answer, just trust your instincts. This is private, you don't have to share this with anyone. Six through 10. There's only 15 questions, so this is the last one. This is the last one. I think I hear some panicking out there. It's okay, don't panic. I'm gonna give you a couple strategies of how to deal with this. We're gonna get through this, it's okay. This is one of the first questions I always ask when I work with somebody. They come in and they say, I'm forgetful, I'm worried, I'm stressed, and I say, how's your sleep? Because a lot of times when we do these baseline things, all of a sudden those symptoms go away magically. So something can look like burnout, can look like anxiety, can look like whatever, but it's really because we aren't doing these baseline things that we know we should be doing. And your family deserves you to be around in the next 30, 40, 50 years, right? And they deserve for you to be the kind of person they want to have around in 30, 40 years, right? So this is definitely the first thing you want to check when you're worried about burnout. Next is self-care. And this is my soapbox moment, okay? Because I know in church circles there's a lot of hesitancy when we hear the term self-care. People are worried about, am I being selfish? Is this, aren't we supposed to lay down our lives for other people and sacrifice and, yay, Catholic, right? This is what we do, right? But just hear me out, okay? Self-care, all it is taking care of yourself. Self-care, okay? And so when you're making choices to eat healthy, for example, if you eat a salad or put vegetables on your plate, is that being selfish? That's self-care. If you decide to exercise for the day, is that being selfish? No, absolutely not. And so when you are taking care of yourself, we're engaging in behaviors that promote health and wellness. It's actually preventative. It can be a very good thing to do that, and it can help us manage when we are having a hard time. So do not be afraid of self-care. I'm not talking about going to the mall, spending $5,000 on like a facial or shopping spree, but things to help us engage in behaviors that maintain wellness. And this was what Alice started to do. She started making sure she was doing those baseline things, taking walks. She had some dogs, so she could take her dogs on walks, get outside, get some fresh air, sticking to those baseline things of making sure her sleep was in order. She also focused on her boundaries. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we do this? It's so true. I mean, one thing that I think is really interesting, because people lament and they worry about Europe. Oh my goodness, they're losing Catholicism, which that's a concern to some extent. But at the same time, there's something very Catholic embedded in their culture still that we do not have here. We have not learned and adapted to that. But part of why I wanted you to think about that difficult work situation is because you're going to make a plan of how to handle that, how to set some boundaries in those situations. Because like some of you brought up earlier, people are going to come for you, right? They're going to know, oh, let me just ask her. She always says yes. Or, if we ask her, we don't have to pay her a lot of money. She'll get it done for us, right? She'll work all night long. We'll have it ready tomorrow on short notice. And so we need to pay attention to setting these boundaries. But here's the thing, people also get concerned about boundaries as well. Am I being kind? Am I being charitable if I put up boundaries and say that I'm not available or that a certain circumstance doesn't work for me? And secularly, all boundaries are just physical, mental, emotional limits, right? They sort of say, They let you know when there's a violation that's happened or an opportunity to be manipulated. But in a Catholic sense, I think they're really important because they let us know you have an opportunity to affirm the dignity of another person. Because when I put up a boundary, I'm saying, I believe in you. You are capable and confident of handling this on your own. As opposed to maybe if you're in a leadership position, swooping in and just taking charge and doing what you need to do to handle the situation. And so part of creating that healthy work environment is giving people freedom to develop and grow and build that confidence. I like to think of the airplane example, the oxygen mask example, right? And so they always say, if you're with a child, put your oxygen mask on first, then put on the child's mask. And if you're a parent, that is like, your first instinct is like, that's horrible, I'm not doing that, I'm putting on my child's oxygen mask first, that doesn't make any sense. But if you play out those decisions, how helpful are you going to be in that situation? If you put your child's oxygen mask on first and then you're passed out because you have no oxygen and your child is left alone fearful in a scary situation on a plane. And so we have to remember that it's really important to be taking care of ourselves. Alice did this. She was serious. She started putting up all kinds of boundaries at work. She started taking her lunch breaks instead of working through them. She blocked out time on her calendar. People, as she's walking out to her break, somebody would say, oh, can I ask you a question? She'd say, nope, don't talk to me, this is my break. She was serious. She would spend time outside during her breaks to get fresh air. And eventually people began to notice. They were like, oh, let me check Allison's calendar. They sort of learned to, let me see if time's available and make sure. Don't bother her right now, this is her time. Other people started to do the same thing. And she's actually being considered for a promotion right now. And so this is what's at stake. We often get afraid and worried about what kind of conflict we could create, but we're also possibly getting in the way of allowing somebody some more freedom and more opportunity for growth. So we're going to go back to that difficult situation at work that you thought about. Are there boundaries being violated? Is it your time? Is it your health? Is it your pay? You can even think about it in terms of the burnout category. So physically, are there boundaries being crossed? Mentally, emotionally, spiritually? I want you to talk to your buddy for about 3 minutes, so you each get 3 minutes each, and answer these questions if you've noticed any boundary violations in that situation at work. We've talked about who God wants you to be, what we think he wants you to do. We've talked about burnout, boundaries. Now we're going to talk about how to be assertive so that you can say no, how to say no when you need to say no, how to say yes when you need to say yes to something. And I kind of have this love-hate relationship with conflict. Conflict is uncomfortable to be a part of. There's tension there, but it's also an opportunity for growth. And so there's a really beautiful chance here to do a great thing for God when we're filled with conflict. I think about St. Mother Teresa when she came to the U.S. sometime in the 90s, and she spoke to officials and she told people that a country that aborts its children is poor in love. I want you to be ready for that type of moment when you can speak the truth in love and assert that. So even in the midst of tension, even in the midst of conflict. So there's this therapy modality called exposure therapy. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. I talk about it a lot. But more or less what happens is if somebody has a phobia or some type of anxiety about something, you expose them to the very thing that they're worried and afraid of, and over time they become more desensitized, more accustomed to it, and that phobia goes away. So for example, if somebody has a fear of spiders, we might have a discussion about what it might be like to have a spider near you. And then that will grow into bringing a picture of a spider into the room, and we slowly creep it closer to the person and check how anxious they're feeling in that moment. Then we might bring in a toy spider, right, and bring it closer to them, let them hold it, all the way to an actual real spider where they could stand and be calm and in the presence. I don't know if you've ever seen those talk shows where they bring a spider out, people run off the stage, and it's all this whole thing. And so we're going to give you an opportunity to be exposed to some conflict today, right, so that you can grow and develop in this area. We have some worksheets. I think somebody was going to be passing out worksheets to you all. Yes, thank you. Here they come. And on there, it explains the 3 different types of communication styles, just to sort of give us an idea of what we're talking about. I'll give it a second to get passed around. So there are 3 styles of communication. The first is passive. Passive behavior is an act of withdrawing away from a situation. So somebody who communicates passively might you might hear something like, oh, somebody asks, where should we all go out to eat? And a passive response is, oh, I don't know, wherever you want to eat. You have a tendency to deny your own feelings when you're engaging in passive behavior, let other people choose, but there can be resentment or guilt that builds up because of this. That's a key difference. There's a difference between freely saying you don't really mind versus actually minding and saying you don't, and then having that guilt and resentment build up. So that's one style of communication. As we go through this, I want you to think about which category is your default. We all have moments where we flow in and out of all 3 communication styles, but what one comes up the most for you? And you'll see it explained on the front of your sheets there. Then we have aggressive behavior. Aggressive is very overreacting to a situation. It can be manipulative, there's lies, misrepresentation of the facts, and people who engage in aggressiveness are more centered and focused on themselves. They care about their needs, the outcome for them in a situation. So they might put people down. They're very intimidating, bullying-like behaviors. So they might have nonverbal expressions where they're very, posturing in somebody's face. You'll hear a lot of insults, anything along those lines, humiliation. And then the third style is assertive. Assertive, like the aggressive behavior, has no problem communicating how they feel, but they do it in a way that is very respectful of the other person. They're open to receiving a response from the other person. Aggressive behavior sort of shuts the other person down and bulldozes. Assertiveness is saying, this is how I feel, this is what I want, and I'm open to hear what you have to say as well. I'm honoring your dignity in this conversation. Hopefully we can come to some type of shared goal, mutual response. So we're going to go through some scenarios, and we're going to give you an opportunity to get a feel for this assertiveness. Let's see. Can we have the next slide? Okay, there we go. So this is how this works, right? So we're going to pretend you're cousin Jessie. She's a very needy person. She's not somebody you look forward to coming to town to visit, right? She's on the phone, and she's saying she's about to spend the next 3 weeks with you. So you can have one of 3 responses. So if you say, 1, we'd love to have you come and stay as long as you like, what would you say that is? Is that a passive, assertive, or an aggressive response? Absolutely. We'd be glad to have you come for the weekend, but we can't invite you for longer. A short visit will be very nice for all of us. Very good. The weather down here has been terrible, right? Lie, manipulation. So you better plan on going somewhere else. Very good. All right, you are getting this. All right, you've bought a toaster, and when you get home, it's not working. One, I bought this toaster and it doesn't work. I would like my money back. Very good. What right do you have selling me junk like this? Or you silently put it in the closet. And maybe even go buy yourself another toaster. Next slide, please. Okay. One of your children has come home late, so let's pretend you've got older kids, right? They've come in late for the past 3 to 4 days. One, I've noticed that for the last few days you've been a little late, and I'm concerned about that. Very good. The next time you're late, you're moving out. You mumble to yourself and give dirty looks, hoping they'll be on time next time. We've all been there, right? You're outside at a restaurant and someone starts smoking. Hey, that smoke is terrible. Coughing, right? Suffer the smoke in silence. Passive. I would appreciate it if you wouldn't smoke here. Assertive. That one's a tricky one, right? It feels scary to imagine saying that to someone. Oh. You're across the room and someone's talking to you, but not quite loud enough for you to hear. So you continue straining to hear, but end up daydreaming. Zoned out, yeah, very passive. You yell, speak up, I can't hear when you talk to yourself. You stop the person, get their attention, and say, would you mind speaking a little louder, please? Assertive. Okay, great. So now that you all are pros at this, we're going to give you an opportunity to act this out, that difficult scenario. You are going to have a little role play. You're going to act this out with your neighbor. And so you're going to be you in the situation, obviously, and hopefully your neighbor will be kind enough to be causing that difficult work situation for you. And you're going to start asserting yourself. You're going to assert some boundaries and get a feel for how that might be in a real life situation. Any questions about that? So you're each going to take a turn getting to practice being assertive based on your work scenarios. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your scenario with someone, on the worksheet on the back there's some sample scenarios for you. In that third section, so you can grab from that as well if you'd rather keep your situation private. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want you to write down one thing you're going to do to practice this. And hopefully at least one time a month you are going to think, oh, it's the 15th, I'm going to practice and being assertive today, right? But write down one thing that you're going to do to develop and grow in this area, especially like Sister was talking about, in a way that we're always being attentive and respectful of the other person. So now you have a mission to fulfill. You have to fulfill that great calling, and you have a way to do that while also building better relationships and being able to root your activity, your mission, your focus in God's plan for your life. So I'm so excited to see what fruit is going to come out of this today. So definitely stay in touch, let me know. Thank you for listening.